What is up, guys? Extra Brucey bonus video for you today, as the government are talking about abolishing OFWAT, the regulatory body that looks after the water industry, the privatised water industry. So I just want to share some thoughts and feelings about that. Let's do this. So you may have seen some updates like this spaffed across your news feeds and timelines this afternoon. It's clear that the water industry is broken, says the Environment Secretary. This one is from BBC News. Water companies to be overseen by new watchdog to prevent abuses of the past, the Labour government says. So first we're going to talk about what those abuses of the past were. Then we're going to talk about why shutting down regulators is not the answer. And then finally we're going to try and round off with my, if I might be so bold, my idea for what actually the answer obviously is. So the privatisation of the water industry took place in the late 80s under Thatcher. That's not going to shock any of you. And the way that privatisation was sold to us, if not the oligarchs, was along the lines of, look, I know privatisation of public utilities is a dirty word, or dirty three words, but it doesn't have to be. Because here's how we're going to make sure that you don't get screwed over, you, the consumer, the general public. Here's how we're going to stop you from feeling like I've just sold off your asset to the highest bidder over here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a franchise agreement. If you're talking about rail, right? Another publicly owned asset, historically, traditionally. With rail, they privatised it. But they set up these franchise agreements. And the idea is that if the rail company have to continuously bid and rebid to run the same line, then if they ran a poor service, they would not get the bid next time. Which on the face of it sounds like it would make sense, right? But you have to remember that there's only like a big four, if you like. Like in most industries in capitalism. Once it's whittled down to a big four, then actually you get into price fixing. It doesn't really matter if you do provide a poor service or people talk shit about you out in the consumer sphere. Ultimately and fundamentally, customers only have a set couple of places that they can go for that service. And so, you know what? Like, if you do run a bad service going into London from Berkshire, you lose that line, you're going to bid for one of the other ones, and one of the other places will have also run a poor service, and then you'll get that. You just do a big swap thing. Like, there's no way really to get rid of First Great Western, Southwest trains, Southern trains, Virgin trains. And because you, the consumer, don't have a choice, it is a superficial choice, really, isn't it? You can't actually decide if you're going to use Virgin trains to go into London or First Great Western to go into London, because only one of those companies is going to provide the service for the foreseeable future. So privatisation on monopoly services like rail doesn't work even when you wrap franchise arrangements around it. So the franchise stuff could just get in the bin. Then the other way that they market it to us is they say, well, don't worry, yes, it's privatised now, but we have an independent regulatory body who will oversee the privatised energy industry, water industry, rail industry, whatever the case may be. Now, the problem with regulators is, like, you might think, oh, well, they'll fine these companies if they don't play ball, if they don't meet their expectations or regulations, then they will be fined. They'll be banned from providing that public service for the foreseeable. But what you actually find is that the regulator tends to be staffed a lot by people who previously worked in that industry. So somebody who worked at Thames Water might end up working at the water regulator OFWAT. Someone that worked at Southern Electric or Eon or something like that will probably go into Ofgem. And there's a good reason for that, right? Because they know the industry, right? So they would know how to regulate it and like where some of the pitfalls and challenges might be, what needs to be kept an eye on. But it also brings with it, like that sort of arrangement, it brings a sort of revolving door dynamic to it, doesn't it? Like, would somebody who worked at Thames Water for 15 years really be inclined to saddle their former colleagues with a, £10 million fine? I don't know. You also have to factor in how toothless the government of the day would actually quite like the regulator to be, right? Because if you have actually quite a bloodthirsty regulator really going after Southern Water, Thames Water, whoever it is, and they say you're not fit to provide this service, the government of the day could reasonably go like, well, who who else is going to run the service? You know, we have a choice of like 3 or 4 companies who can do this, or nationalization, and we can't afford to, you know, buy out the existing shareholders. Nobody else is going to be able to run this any better standard than this. So actually, we would really rather if you just went and played golf with them. So there's an element of that too. And then there is the more infamous, very troubling financial arrangements that reportedly have been the case, for want of a better phrase. Sorry, I haven't really prepped this as well as I would ordinarily do. And you could probably tell that by the total lack of jokes so far. But some of the financial activity that has dogged these water companies, it appears to be, according to investigative journalists, it appears to be along the lines of like in year 1, year 4, year 5, they didn't invest in the water companies, in the sewers, in the waterways. They did try to fob off criticism by saying like, yeah, we need new investors. We need more money to come in, and that's why we're going to have to raise your water bills. And so they would go out and they would try to hunt investors to put their money into this corporation, but the investors would only put their money into Thames Water's coffers if they could be promised a return on investment. So Thames Water would then be like, oh, well, you know, you're going to love this. We can just make it rain. We'll make it rain in the Clizzub. If you buy £2 million of Thames Water shares, the dividends that we will pay you will be astronomical. And so these investors come in and the dividends are promised, and then the company have to find a way of paying those dividends. And whether that is jacking up your bills or going to banks and then arranging loans to then pay the dividends, maybe in addition to raising your bills. I mean, that is reportedly what has happened, is like year after year after year, they have just built up these debts again and again while funneling out dividends to shareholders and the board. And the whole time, the regulator seemingly has made no effort to correct this or to warn them or to fine them or to pull away their license and their ability to actually run this public service. So you can understand the anger at the regulator, can't you? There is obvious corruption, or at best, like huge incompetence being displayed here. So you might be thinking, well, why would you want to keep the regulator then, Aid? And so let's get into that then. The problem that I have with sacking off this regulator is that, to my perspective, this appears to be almost a carbon copy of what they tried after like the phone hacking business in the press, but also after the global financial crash with the Financial Services Authority. So after the global financial crash, the credit crunch and so on, people's mortgages went up, life got a bit harder, prices for everything went up, unemployment rose. A lot of people were really unhappy. And the archetypal villain that was plastered all over the papers with regard to that was Sir Fred Goodwin. But actually, a lot of the anger should have been directed just straight at the banks, okay? It was the banks that were behaving like a casino. It was the banks that were wrapped up in American subprime mortgages, ill-advisedly. And there was a lot of fear going around that, you know, what if this hate, this blame doesn't dissipate? What if they try to burn down the banks? And so the government of the day, which I think was Gordon Brown's, and then this bled through into the coalition years, they created a new regulator. They were like, oh, the problem here is a lack of regulation. This regulator is not fit for purpose because they allowed the global financial crash to happen. And so the FCA was retired and in came the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. What is it? How does it differ? Has it performed any better? No, it's not any different. It's still staffed by people who are ex-industry, people who used to work with the people who they're now charged with regulating. There was a report that came out from a cross-party committee who were charged with looking at the effectively regulating the regulator, checking that they are actually doing what they're supposed to. And they came away with a conclusion. They were like, this regulator is abysmal. Like, there's no accountability. They don't seem to show any interest in actually seeking out corruption or correcting course of any of these banks are just a law unto themselves. So the FSA was retired, and it was a sort of PR exercise. They were like, oh, everyone's really angry. What if we come out front and center and say, oh, it's not fit for purpose to regulate. But now, look, we have a new and improved regulator called the FCA now. So there was that one. And then there was the press regulator. This is after all of the hate and blame around phone hacking. Actually, it might have been modestly before that. But they retired the old press reg, which obviously is not a public sector thing. It's not the same as water, energy, rail. But they did retire the regulator off the back of public disharmony. And so the PCC disappeared and in came IPSO. And so this is who regulates the press now, like the print media. But I mean, when was the last time that you heard of IPSO dishing out a meaningful fine or demanding a front page apology or saddling like a £10 million fine around the Telegraph for perpetuating conspiracy theory? When was the last time that we talked about, print media's influence on the wider journo-political sphere, ownership of newspapers, like the maximum number of titles that one individual could own, the influence that they would then command? You don't hear about any of that. It's another toothless regulator, right? They retired the old one. They came back with a new one. Nothing changed. And, quite amusingly, Rupert Murdoch himself, he took a very similar approach. So when the News of the World became like brand toxic, brand cancer, he wound that down, rebranded it, just called it something else, exactly like the FSA became the FCA, exactly like the PCC became IPSO. He wound down News of the World, rebranded it, called it The Sun on Sunday, and then just bring it, and then it's, oh yeah, everything's great again now, everything's fine. So all that's going to happen off the back of this closure of this regulator is like, it's not going to bring bills down, it's not going to stop corruption, it's not going to tame whoever ends up buying these public assets again, the water industry, the privatized water utilities, or anything else. All it's going to do is they'll just say, oh, OFWAT is gone, and now this is the Office of Water Regulation for the United Kingdom. It'll just be called something different. It'll probably even be staffed with exactly the same people, or a lot of them. I mean, it seems so, just to round this off, it seems so simple to people like me, where I'm like, look, other countries don't have to deal with this level of corruption and privatized ownership, jacked up bills for energy, for water, the most expensive rail network in Europe. Like, I remember going to Dublin, this is a few years ago now, I remember going to Dublin and travelling the equivalent of Maidenhead into London, but on the outskirts, like an hour outside of Dublin, into Dublin, and it cost me like £7. It was like the equivalent of £7. So like other countries don't have to deal with this problem. The solution is obvious. You nationalise public utilities. They are monopoly services. They are services that everybody relies on. When you restrict the choice of options open to the general public and basically say to them, you only have Thames Water, you only have First Great Western, you have no choice, you're bent over a barrel, and the prices every year keep on rising, like that setup is completely unsustainable. And Labour have a choice now. Labour truly have a choice. They can either be bold and they can actually act like a Labour government. They could be like, look, we've tried privatisation. We've tried it your way for decades, and it is an obvious failure. It didn't work in the 90s. You didn't fix it throughout the coalition years and the 14 years of Tory administration, and it's not working now. And it is going to continue to get even worse and more expensive. They can actually be honest and bold and come right out front and centre and say, we tried it your way, it didn't work, now we're going to try this. Or they can continue trying to fit this square object, which is ostensibly Tory austerity, outsourcing, privatisation ideology, right? It's Tory ideology. That's the square object. They can continue trying to fit that through the spherical hole of logic. Those are the options. And I said this on Blue Sky earlier. I was like, you know, obviously the solution here is renationalizing it. I don't see how anyone can argue with that. And somebody clapped back immediately. Oh, with what money? You know, how are you going to pay for it, Ed? But this is the problem in spades, just to go back to the press regulation thing, right? This is the problem in spades. It's like Nigel Farage can come out on the front page of the Telegraph today and say he's going to build 40 new prisons to the cost of like 10 or 15 billion pounds, not explain how he's going to fund any of that. The Reform Party could come out and go like, oh yeah, we're going to do this, that and the other and improve the infrastructure and buy out the steelworks and give everybody a tax cut. Nobody says shit. Regardless of the press regulator that have been rebranded over the last few years. They could say anything, whatever they like. Nobody challenges them. I say something that is demonstrably true, like privatization of public utilities doesn't work and we need to renationalize it. And the first fucking question straight out the gate is like, how are you going to pay for it? I don't know. Sell the Falklands.